Hello and welcome back to the Crossing the Line podcast. My name is Charlie Cullicutt and hosting alongside me, as always, Jim Buff and my partner in crime, Oliver Rednall.
Hello, hello.
And joining us today, an exceptionally talented and beautiful woman. She's modelled for well-known designers such as Giorgio Armani, Gucci, Ralph Lauren, and many more. And today, she has been gracious enough to take some time out from looming motherhood to come and speak to us. Ellen Frances Gibbons, thank you so much for joining us today. You have worked as a model. So you graduated from Guildhall.
Yes.
Did you go straight into modelling work, or did you do any work from there? Or?
I had a really sort of I had a weird route round, because a lot of people seem to, you get models that say like Cara Delevingne that then moved into acting. I was sort of shifting backwards and forwards as it went along. But the weird thing is that I went to drama school and then came out and started modelling, because usually it's model turned actress. It's sort of actress turned bit of a model. But I was modeling from 2010 to 2012, and then went to drama school. And then in 2016 sort of came out, started doing bits and bobs, and that sort of ramped up a bit over the last couple of years. Not so much in the last year.
And so you were modeling before you went to drama school. Was that something that you were you picked up? Did you sign up? Or
I signed myself up, not really knowing what I was getting into. I didn't really know. I had no idea. I come from Lincoln, which is quite a small city, and I was leaving school at the time and had really no idea what modelling was going to entail. So I actually had quite a full-on couple of years at the beginning. I think the modelling industry has changed a lot between 2010 and now. Also different agencies sort of run in different ways, and sort of the work I was doing was different. But it was a bit of a baptism of fire into adulthood for 2 years.
Sure. And you mentioned that modelling is different to what you kind of expected. I was going to say that if you say model to people, they imagine catwalks and putting on nice clothes and being in photo shoots and that kind of thing. Is that what it is? What would you say modelling is?
It is that. I think it's harder work than a lot of people realise. You've got to be, it's a funny thing on a set, I think especially at a shoot, because you're sort of there all day, you've got you almost have to be a bit of a diplomat between different factions of the crew, because you're sort of in the middle of everything. And I've always found it difficult as an actor coming in, because you're engaged with the work, but you very rarely have any say in the work unless you're sort of coming in as a personality in the modelling you're doing. Whereas, as you're an actor, you're part of the creative process rather than the conduit for it, which I've always found. I've found that more interesting going back into it than I did. I didn't notice it. I sort of took it for granted when I was sort of a teenager, and then as I've come back after drama school, it's been a little bit more of a challenge actually on set, sort of not wanting to give creative input, because it's not always your job.
Because you were
asked.
Obviously, and I did some at Guildhall as well, and they're very much into the collaborative. We're a team.
We're a team process, which really isn't the case when you're on a photo shoot for a brand.
Is it very much a case like with acting where you'll spend almost the entire day in a trailer and then come out, take some shots and go back? Or
no, you're in use a lot more as a model than as an actor. Sort of when I've been on set for TV and stuff, you're in your trailer in your hair and makeup, whereas actually if you're on a shoot, the hair and makeup is often in the room that the shoot is happening in, and you might have, I think the most outfits I've done in a day sort of in a shoot was 100, so you change outfits 100 times a day, which is quite, maybe at lunch, it's a lot. It's actually, in some ways, I find it more exhausting, especially if you're shooting e-commerce, which is what a lot of the work is at the moment. So that's things like, like ASOS and things like that. That kind of photo shoot is a big part of the work in the UK now, which it wasn't so much when I was beginning, but obviously with online shopping, it's really ramped up.
And you were saying about how people don't understand quite how hard work it is. What kind of skill set did you, or have you had to learn in order to, because it is very much a skill to be a model. It isn't just a case of looking a certain way.
Because it's a weird sort of balance, because you get some models that can really, there's something innately in them that sort of can transform, and a personality that comes out in photos, and some don't have that but are just super beautiful and sort of what works. But I think, like I said, I think being a diplomat, you actually really have to learn sort of good interpersonal skills very quickly, confidence, actually growing confidence very quickly has to be a thing, sort of, because when I left school, a lot of my friends were starting at university and doing freshers, and I was having to go around doing, there's a thing called go-sees, which are like auditions really, but you're sort of a teenager and sort of tramping all around London, sort of knocking on random photographers' doors, and you haven't met them, and just sort of having to sort of shine in the moment and sort of be memorable. So yeah, it's a lot. It's sort of, that confidence has to come in quickly, and then you start to pick up on sort of light and sort of posing, and all of that does come with it, because that is a part of that, is a skill in itself. Because if you don't learn that very quickly, the photos sort of fall flatter than they could if you sort of really do start to look. I remember a photographer sort of I worked with really early on said, like, pay attention to magazines, but also look at classical art and the way people are posing in that. Look at the Sistine Chapel and the way people are. Something about them. I mean, that's something we did at drama school as well. It's like thinking about the body and how that works, and sort of having an awareness of that does make a lot of difference.
We interviewed a director of photography, and he said certain actresses who have been in the game quite a long time will know the light that they want to be lit in. Do you find yourself going, oh, I'm not sure about this light, this isn't me?
Yeah, I can do that. Sometimes if I arrive on the day and the light's on the, it's really silly. It sounds so silly. If the light's on the left, I'm like, oh no, I have to shoot on this side of my face all day. Okay, let's see how this is going to go, because I just don't think it shoots as well, and that's something I've just learned over time.
You say that's silly, but there are, and I've heard of big actors, Leonardo DiCaprio and people, who will say they'll have it stipulated in their contracts that they need to have one of their big shots on their right side.
Allegedly.
Really?
Allegedly.
I think it's interesting.
I've heard of another older pop star that is followed with lights for interviews. Like, they're not even taking photos, but she is lit at all times.
Excellent.
So I guess light is everything. It's key. Yeah. It's always. Yeah.
So you mentioned, obviously, before you were knocking on people's doors, and since coming out of drama school, you've then been working more as a model. How do auditions work for modeling? Like, is it a case of you turn up and
it can really depend. So there's a couple of different kinds of jobs, sort of general jobs you'll go up for. And I think the main three are, you've got television commercials, shoots like photography, and that could be anything, from like smaller things to bigger campaigns. They might run in the same way. Oh, and then there's another job that a lot of people do. It's just called fittings. So that's I used to do that a little bit for Mulberry and for Celine, where you just go in for some of the bigger brands and they just need a human mannequin. So that's another thing, and it's quite a big, and then that can be for general sort of collections or for the shows, which is a little bit more of a rushed, sort of more intense job, where they need to fit the clothes on someone and see someone walk. And then the last one is for the shows, which I haven't done in a while because it's quite a young person's game. Though that's changing. When I started sort of doing fashion shows at 18, I was old to be starting, and now that's illegal. Now you have to be 18. But I know, because I think especially in France, they've become really careful about it, because Paris was very famous for having much younger, thinner girls, and that was sort of the hub of very high fashion. So I think you have to bring in a birth certificate and a certificate of health now to do the shows in Paris, which is great.
Wow.
Which is, I don't know if you saw, but that's what I haven't done any recently, but 18, I was older, and there were a lot of girls doing their first jobs, sort of their first bigger jobs. There was a big thing of finding 15-year-olds and putting them on the catwalks.
But this was particularly for catwalks as opposed to the...
Yeah, specifically for catwalks. And the idea, I think, the sort of the trajectory of the career, and you see it with a lot of models, and less so now, and I mean, I'd like to go into that a bit later, is in terms of how much Instagram's changed, and this is all pre-Instagram, but the sort of trajectory was you'd come in as a sort of a new face, and you might have done a couple of higher profile photo shoots with some of the bigger photographers if you'd been lucky, and then you would fly to New York and you would do the castings for the New York shows, and you might get a good exclusive there, so say Calvin Klein, Marc Jacobs, and then that would mean you were picked up for London, then Milan, then Paris on specific jobs, and then from there you get your perfume campaigns, and that's how you're making money. So it's like, it was quite a specific, that's what it was, sort of like editorial high fashion models. It was quite a specific route that now has sort of been interestingly sort of negated by Instagram, which I find fascinating, and sort of self-promotion.
Regarding talking about that you fly all over the place and do all sorts of different jobs, the media has sort of portrayed it quite often in certain ways that the modeling industry is can be quite a dark and hostile place. Have you found that, or is that just to kind of sell a story or sell a certain image because of an event that happened or whatever, or is it something that you feel has is accurately represented?
I think it can, I think especially sort of 10 plus years ago, it could be a dark and hostile. I think now there's a lot more sort of safeguarding that goes on with models. A lot more, because I've especially felt, and this is someone coming from a middle class British home, so I actually had so I wasn't actually in any sort of place of risk compared to some girls that had come from say less developed countries, and they'd come out as younger teenagers on their own to these big cities. But I think there was sort of I think everyone's experience of it is that, like, if I look at among my friends who've all had sort of different modeling careers, some people have had, only sort of light and joy to talk about. And some people say, this has been horrific. I had this experience. This was happening with my eating, which was always a bigger thing. And
was that from pressure from other models, certain agencies?
It was never, I don't think it would ever come from the models. And what I always found interesting about working with other models generally, and still to this day, like, most of my best friends are models. They're not necessarily sort of actors I've met along the way. They're often models. And I think it's just because we all sort of come from different walks of life. So, some people, I've got a couple of friends that, didn't necessarily finish school. They just went into modeling and they worked that way. And I've got some friends that had like sort of biomedical degrees from Bristol and stuff like that. So like a real mix of girls. And the only thing that sort of joins us, unlike, if you're going up to be, if you're trying to be an actor or a dancer or a doctor, you've got sort of the trajectory is in common, and the walk of life might be sort of common in what you've done to get there. With modeling, the only thing you have is genetics, which you can't change. So you get this amazing mix of people, and the way you're being picked for jobs is generally just on your genetics, which you can't again change. So I think it actually means there's a little bit less competition between models than that there might be between people in different careers, which actually makes it a bit friendlier in some ways. So I think it's definitely coming from the agencies, and the agencies are just picking their sort of notes up from designers. So I think a lot of it trickles down from the big fashion houses in terms of what people would want, and the big photographers and the agencies. So my pressure with weight was always coming from my first agency, not my second. Really?
Interesting. Yeah. And what sort of, if you don't mind talking about that, what kind of things would it be hinted at, or would it be specifically spoken about?
It was very specifically spoken about, and I was banned from traveling. So I was supposed to go to New York, and I picked up an agency there, and my hips were 91 centimeters and not 90. And I think 91 centimeters, you're still quite small size 8, so you're still pretty thin, sort of for, sort of near 6 foot girl. But to do the shows, they actually I sort of started at a time when they wanted exceptionally thin women, that you had to be extremely small, and especially the hip measurements. And where do you think this is for editorial stuff?
And where do you think that came from? Because exceptionally thin is an unusual kind of desire to, of course, we all have different body shapes and things like that. But where has that kind of culture come from, do you think?
I don't know if it's coming from the designers, or it's just sort of what people then expect. And I do think, I actually really thank the Kardashians for changing what our sort of view of what women's bodies should be. I think it is sort of changing now within the modeling industry. So what people are expected to be, if you look at a lot of advertising campaigns now, there's not only sort of a bigger diversity in skin color, but also in age and body shape. Is becoming much more fashionable, to say, here's a very skinny blonde woman, and here's sort of a, bigger lady with red hair, and here's there's all of these different things. But I don't know, I think it's just coming from so many places. But I remember getting, when I was 18 and I was going up for these shows, my the woman that ran my agency at the time saying, she's just very frankly, she's a French woman, very frankly just said, Ellen, the designers, they don't want tits and ass, they want shoulders and feet. And I think a lot is to do with how the clothes hang. I think, you call people clothes rails, and that is it, sort of this thing of having this very skinny lines for the clothes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Because this is interesting to hear, because you and I know nothing about this.
I was
Yeah.
about to say,
Evidently.
I didn't know anything about it when I started, so it was such a shock, because I come from school where, I'd been like, no one had ever, I was quite lucky at my school growing up, no one ever talked about weight, which is maybe a bit unusual, but none of the girls, it was never really a concern in the sort of culture of my school to think about sort of size and weight. And yeah, then suddenly, as soon as I sort of joined my agency, they gave me a target of how much to lose, and that became a thing. And I think it's when you go, I don't know if they still do it, but I remember when girls used to go to Japan to work, they used to get weighed every day by their agency. And I used to get measured in the middle of the room. They used to put a tape measure around me in front of everyone in the office.
If you don't mind me saying on here, you are a very, very, very slim.
Well, not at the moment.
Not at the moment, obviously, the bit maybe there. But how do you go about losing that extra thing? Was it a case of you can't eat, you've got to?
Because obviously bone structure and muscle has a degree.
Bone structure and muscle is a big thing, and a lot of girls,
you can't really reduce that.
I think models more now, it's a thing of health eating and exercise. But when I was there during Fashion Week, I knew 2 girls that ended up on a drip in hospital because they were running around and not eating.
Wow.
Crazy.
Wow.
And it was hot. I remember it was really horrible. And you would occasionally see these girls at castings, and they were so slim that it's a thing that women with quite extreme eating disorders can get, where you get, like, I call it like a peach fuzz.
Yeah, that's right. I've heard of that. Yeah.
And things like that. And that's when the body's losing too much weight. And the awful thing is these girls were getting booked.
So it was like affirmation of their bad habits.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't. Yeah, but then I don't think it was their bad habits. I think it was them trying. Yeah. I think it was them trying to sort of survive and make a career. So it's a really hard cycle, because then all of that body shape becomes normalized. But what was really great when I came out of drama school is I went into sort of a different category. So I wasn't doing the fashion shows anymore. And when you come out into more commercial modeling, so then I sort of was, just doing sort of more stuff with sort of skincare and beauty, or I worked for M&S for a lot of time. And then they really don't want you to be too thin for a lot of these other jobs. I think it specifically was, and I don't think it is the case necessarily anymore, the sort of higher fashion runway shows.
And is that something that you welcome, that you're glad you don't have to worry about that, or is that something that you kind of miss in a way? Obviously not the health concern. I
mean, the shows I miss, because I really liked, I think it's the actors thing, I really like sort of performing, which you don't get in the same way on a set with a photo shoot, because you don't have a live audience. But yeah, apart from that, I don't really miss it. The castings were very intense. You do about 20 a day around London, which is quite a lot of different places to get to. And this is sort of pre-iPhone Google Maps as well. So you do it with this thing called an A to Z, which I don't know if you guys would even know about.
How dare
it was just like
know
a little.
Exactly what it is.
I don't know. Is that an application or something? What is it? No, it turned up in the Sherlock episode, didn't it? That's how he solves the riddle. But no, I haven't actually seen one.
Yeah.
You've mentioned that obviously weight was, but things have changed over the years. How has that affected, first off, your work? Because I imagine that people are trying to be more body conscious and more open, and whether it's disabilities or weight or what isn't generally considered beautiful. Has that affected you in your own work, or?
I'm not sure, because it was always sort of changing. But I think the standards for beauties are shifting, and they're just sort of diversifying as well. Which, I mean, I think because of Instagram and stuff, there's more brands than ever that need people to model. But then I think there's more models than ever, because, and I think it's actually really a good thing, sort of what the idea of what a model must be, which used to be, if you look at sort of, say, like, when I think back to lineups of shows that I might have been casting for, everyone would have been, 5'9" plus, so very tall. you know, generally around the 6 foot mark for shows. And then most people would have been blonde, like white and blonde. And now that is really changing, which is fantastic. So maybe, yeah, I haven't noticed there being sort of necessarily less work for me, but just sort of finding it in different areas. And sort of every year you sort of get, so, you know, when you get a little bit older as well, sort of the work does start to change. I think the most surprising one was when I was 26, I got sent on a Mother of the Bride casting. So that would have been a very young bride. But yeah.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But I don't think it's, I don't think it's changed. I think it's just, the sort of the idea of what a model is shifting. And now there's a lot of agencies that specifically will hire people that don't look like sort of your typical sort of old school idea of what a model, you know, your Claudia Schiffer sort of model is.
And obviously actors have casting types, or they often they'll go for certain roles. Do models, do you, for example, have a certain type of thing that you find yourself being booked for? I mean, this is very crudely put. I know nothing about this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I did, because when I was a bit more waifish and teenage, so then I was going up for fashion shows specifically, and then some of my other best friends, I think they maybe tried one fashion show casting in their life, and everything else they'd have done like bridal magazines or sort of maternity shoots with a fake bump, or all sorts of things like that. So there was definitely a type. I think at the moment, I have no idea what my type is anymore, and it might be totally different after. I mean, I've done one job this year because of COVID. I think especially because of being pregnant, there's not being the most. So because by the time sort of we were all out of lockdown, I was starting to look quite pregnant. I could only do pregnancy shoots, but then a lot of brands just weren't shooting or didn't want to hire a pregnant woman just because of the risk. Like no one wants to sort of bring COVID to a set and then the pregnant model catch it.
Yeah, no, that's probably why. So, but you say a lot of models will have a fake bump put on rather than get a real pregnant.
Yeah, and that has actually become a little bit
taboo.
That's become a bit taboo at the moment as well, because for so many, I mean, I think I'd say there's two main reasons why that is. And one is there's a lot of models that are pregnant, every year there will be models becoming pregnant, just like there are in any other career, and suddenly they can't work, but there are shoots for pregnant women with an 18-year-old with a foam bump on their tummy. And, maybe that's not just in the same way as, with other work now, you wouldn't necessarily have, say in the acting industry, you wouldn't have someone that's a wheelchair user. They would probably now try and cast someone that is, or someone that's deaf, they would cast someone that is deaf. And I think it's the same with pregnancy. I think you should really try and cast someone that's for modeling if you can find them. And then I think the other one is that, and I've heard this from other pregnant, from when because I had a friend that sort of spoke about this a lot last year when she was pregnant, and I think she was on with the Mail on Sunday talking about it. So I posted it. And interestingly, quite a few women, some of whom were actresses and stuff that had been pregnant, said, thank you for posting this. It meant a lot. Because when I was trying to shop for clothes when I was pregnant, and you feel very vulnerable when you're pregnant, your body's changing, doesn't look like it used to. And it's not just having a bump, different parts of your body change. And they said they felt really weird having those, looking at all of the adverts and stuff to try and choose clothes. One woman that clearly you can actually see like the line of the prosthetic bump, and their legs are skinny and their bums are tiny and their face is skinny.
So it doesn't match up to what they're meant.
Yeah, and they're 18 years old, which is statistically 10 years younger than the average first-time mother. So yeah, not feeling represented was a thing. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a thing, and I would never. But then it's a really hard one, because I'd never sort of say a model shouldn't take a job because you're earning money, you're trying to earn a living. So I wouldn't ever say it's the model's fault for taking those jobs. I think it needs to sort of be looked into the other way. Why are we casting people with bumps? But yeah.
Sure. You've mentioned a couple of times already, and you said you want to talk about Instagram and how that has changed the landscape of modeling. Is it? I don't really know how to phrase this question, but is it a case of models taking photos of themselves and sticking on Instagram and then just hoping that catches on? Like, how has Instagram changed the modeling landscape?
I think it's really, really, probably, it's changed everything probably. About it. So now when you go to a casting, you might have to put your Instagram handle and how many followers you have. And that will actually it depends on the job. Some they don't care, some they do. Because sometimes they want someone that has a following that will bring their following to the brand. And sometimes they don't care and they want the model and the look and that's it. But in terms of self-promotion, you can do so much. If you can get yourself, I don't have very many, but if you can get yourself 400,000 followers on Instagram, people will start bringing work to you rather than you having to wait for an agent. And I know a couple of people now that actually were with quite big modeling agencies that are now specifically just on Instagram, and they work through a couple of agencies that now just deal in Instagram. They just deal in influencers. So the sort of lines between sort of your classical sort of idea of a model and now an influencer, which I guess was born from the blogger, has sort of conjoined, interestingly. So some modeling agencies now just have influencer sections on their websites. They'll have sort of new face models, main board, which is the sort of more established models, and then they'll have influencers there. So it's all sort of merging, which is interesting, yeah.
And when you're online and you see people going from or taking pictures and things like that, do you see things, and they're trying to promote themselves, what do you see that you would recommend them not doing? Are there any things like that's not quite in good taste, or if so, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I
there
think
is anything, because we live in a selfie generation now.
Yeah, because we are the selfie generation. I think for anyone that wants to have their own thing, I think if you're sort of finding your niche, because some people can be totally gregarious, and maybe for me that wouldn't work, but for you that is your that is what makes you you, and that's what draws people into you. So I don't know if there is anything necessarily wrong apart from being like a horrible racist or something like that online. But yeah.
So if you're out there and you were thinking of doing
being a horrible racist, maybe don't. But yeah. Because some people can even say quite offensive things, but of course people love it. But yeah, I don't know for models and stuff. Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily. I think my only thing is like maybe people face tune too much at the moment, sort of really edit the face bit.
Okay, yeah.
And there's a culture of that around, that is really affecting everyone around the world. But yeah.
And in terms of people who are looking to become models or looking into a career in that, what advice would you give them? Because like you say, when you started out, it was very different then, but...
Yeah, it was different then, but I think if you wanted to go sort of through an agent, which is probably the best route for finding work, through one of the big agents, say if you're in the UK, in London or Manchester, I think because they used to do walk-ins, I don't know if people still do walk-ins, but, send your photos in and a bit about yourself is what they generally ask for. You shouldn't pay for shoots with photographers. That's a big thing I think a lot of people want. And that was, I've noticed that's still the same now as it was, 10 years ago. But so I know some people, there was sort of a culture, people going around and saying, oh, if you give me 500 quid, I'll do a photo shoot and I'll send it to this agency I know. You shouldn't have to pay for those shoots, because a lot of people can sort of be done. But I think if you just take your own sort of photos at home and send them into agencies, the agencies are very careful now about looking after people. They have to be.
These are the safeguards you were talking about before.
Yeah. I think there's so many safeguards now. I mean, safeguarding in terms of that. I think for, say, younger models that are start getting a little bit established at the agents now, or, when they're if they're starting to sort of see a couple of clients, they're not professionally working yet, but sort of putting their, dipping their toes in, they'll always be taken by a chaperone, things like that. So I remember when I was there were some like 15-year-old girls from Romania that had just moved over on their own.
Wow.
And were going on, which is very young. I mean, you're a total child at that point.
Yeah.
Whereas now, they might be 16, 17, but their mums have come with them. And, or someone from the agencies has been employed to take them around that day.
And
so, there's a lot more.
That has changed just within the industry, or is that a law thing? Or
I think it's a legal thing, but yeah, definitely within the industry. I think people are just...
It sounds like common sense, really, doesn't
it?
Yeah. You'd think so, but then you were saying that 10 years ago that you had 15-year-old girls coming on, doing hundreds of catwalks and having their time, their bodies, their whatever abused.
Yeah,
yeah,
in so many ways. And like there's lots of stories. I mean, it has changed a lot because did you see there was a scandal in the Guardian did a big thing on it like a couple of weeks ago. was it Linda Evangelista's ex-husband had actually been
I'd
accused
seen
of like
that,
several rape charges and stuff like that. I mean, this is from back in the 80s, and I think things like that now just hope. Like, I mean, you never know what's going on right under the surface, but I think now it's just really not as common a thing. And I think actually things like having camera phones and stuff on set have actually made people a lot safer in some ways, and actually having your own profile on Instagram and Twitter and things like that, you know, means people are much more willing to talk about anything that's going on.
Just because of the amount of evidence that you can.
Yeah, I think people are a bit more empowered to talk about things now and sort of stand up for things. And you sort of know, you know, you've got internet and you can, you know, as a young model, you can educate yourself maybe a bit more than people could 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Obviously, there are lots of myths about modeling. Are there any that you have found to be true? I mean, there are some that probably we have that you've never heard of and vice versa, but...
What are yours?
Well, I mentioned one right at the beginning, that is very much a case of go on, take the photos, buzz off. It is just about looking pretty. Do you find that it is more about, you know, being able to sell yourself in a different way? Or...
As a person, sort of on set.
And that everyone is vain, and it's a very much a vain industry. And like I said, it's a real skill to be a model.
Yeah, well, it is a vain, you know, when you really think about it, it is a vain industry, like the fashion industry. It's aesthetics, and you know the top end of it is art, but that's still aesthetics. It's a totally, you know, visually based industry, so that is a part of it. And it's only when you sort of get a message behind fashion, which is starting to come in. I think like Nike have been doing it, you know, with BLM this year and stuff, and thinking about that kind of side of campaigns, but that's still not the main part of the campaigns. And sort of, you know, the things you see, adverts and stuff you see on Instagram, on television, it's about selling product. So yeah, in that way, I guess it's the vain capitalist industry.
Have you had any modeling like heroes or icons that have been inspiring to you?
There was a model I really loved when I was younger called, I don't know if she's still about, she's called Freya Bayer Eriksson, who's this brilliant Danish model. And I always loved Kate Moss when I was younger, because she's just brilliant. She was just so cool. And Lily Cole, who's now an actress as well, who's great. And then, I'm trying to think at the moment, I've got anyone I sort of really idolise.
And what is it about those ones that you've just named? What is it, something that you just related to, you connected to, when you saw their pictures?
I think so, and there's a sort of mystique, and that is actually what is disappearing. And I think it's the same with actors, because now we want to see into people's lives, and that's again the amazing thing about these, you know, about phones and stuff. You know, we want to know about people's lives, because sort of what modeling models were for a long time was beautiful and silent. They were these sort of beautiful silent muses you didn't really know that much about. You know, you sort of look back to Twiggy or Jane Birkin, you didn't know much about them. It was just about what they might be giving off. Whereas now you sort of, you know, you look on your phone and you've got Kendall Jenner, who's showing you exactly where she is on holiday and what she thinks about her meal. And that's a totally different thing. And that's, you know, there's nothing wrong or right about either. I think maybe it's quite cool that you can now really see into people's sort of a version of people's lives that they want to see. But I think that's sort of the big difference with modeling now. And I think, I think that's what sort of drew me as a sort of a young woman, sort of 18 years old, to these specific models. It was this sort of mystique of this, you know, you can imagine a life in Paris doing the things that you're not doing in your sort of day to day.
And if you were to give advice to your younger self when you first started out, knowing what you know now, what would it be?
I think just actually be yourself. And that's hard because you don't really know what yourself is at 18. But actually just stick to you and not try to emulate anyone else, because you're only shooting yourself in the foot when you try and be something else. Because it's never going to be genuine.
You've mentioned before people like Lily Cole and Cara Delevingne, who were models turned actors. Is that something that is on the horizon for you? Do you feel like you want to start moving out of the modeling work and back into acting?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there was never a time I sort of stopped acting, because I've been acting since I left Guildhall. I sort of left and did quite a few plays and then a couple of TV things, and the modelling was always alongside. And the modeling's been brilliant that it would always sort of come when there was a little bit of a gap in the acting. But I think what's quite nice about now is that you're not really penalized for modeling whilst you're acting, which used to be a big thing. You used to have to really hide, models would have to really hide their career, change their name, their professional name if they wanted to, or, take a lot of time out of modeling to go back into acting. Where I think now, we are, with so many people, we're in I just call it like the time of the slashy, the model turned actress, turned environmentalist, turned chef, turned blogger, turned this, turned that. And I think there's so many people now that I look at, they're a biologist and a I don't know, skateboarder or something like that, that we are, they say that the average millennial is going to have 5 careers.
Yeah, that's a future guest for us, biologist / skateboardist.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I think ideally my love has always been acting, but I sort of will take what comes along.
Sure.
Especially coming out of a pandemic, sort of whatever keeps my baby fed. But yeah.
Fair enough. And there's a couple of questions we like to ask right at the end of the podcast. And one of them is, I know we haven't really talked about movies much this podcast, but are there any movies that you are ashamed that you haven't watched in your life?
I've got a few. I haven't watched Taxi Driver.
Say again?
Sorry,
I know.
the microphone.
It's like the podcast just ends.
Done. She's out. She's dead to us.
Scratches at that point.
Haven't watched Taxi Driver. Haven't watched Shawshank Redemption. Oh God, what else haven't I watched? There are some things. Oh, I haven't watched, what's that brilliant one with Habit? And I haven't watched No Country for Old Men.
I think you can stop there.
I know, it's terrible. There's just some of these, when you're just like, how have they missed me? It's that thing, when you just know you need a time to sit down and sort of hunker down and watch it, and you have to be in the right mindset to watch. So I haven't watched Sophie's Choice either. I think especially now having a baby, there's certain things you just won't.
Yeah, that's right.
Don't really.
Yeah.
Are there any films about modeling that you like and you think are accurate?
Oh.
Obviously, there's Devil Wears Prada is more fashion industry, but it does.
Yeah,
cover
fashion
that
industry,
kind of
but
thing.
actually, I don't think it. I think that one is actually pretty, in a lot of ways, quite spot on. But I actually
Really?
can't think of any films about modeling that are bang on.
Okay.
I think it's probably the same for ballerinas. There aren't many, ballet films that are bang on to the industry, because I think people want the glamour, and what the reality is a little bit different.
Yeah, I think anyone who's in a profession, they watch it, they're like, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, the nitpicking starts quite
The
quickly.
nitpicking starts pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's everything.
Thanks for coming on, Ellen. It's been a
Very much for
pleasure.
coming on.